If you all take your seats, we'll begin in just a moment. Well, welcome. My name is Ross Sandler. I'm professor of law and director of the Center for New York City Law, and I welcome you to New York Law School and the first breakfast of this academic year. I see many people who are new to these breakfasts and new to New York Law School, and what we do is we have 6 breakfasts like this a year on various topics. We send out email alerts, and if you would like to be sure you get an email alert, please drop a card off at the front desk as you're leaving. We would like to keep you interested and keep you coming to New York Law School. These breakfasts, we're now in the 14th year, and we've been fortunate to have sponsors. Consolidated Edison has been a sponsor from the very beginning. Verizon is a sponsor. The law firm of Greenberg Traurig and the Murray Goodgold Foundation. Sally Goodgold is here, and we thank you for that. This particular program is co-sponsored with the Diane Abbey Center for Children and Family, a new institute here at New York Law School, and Diane Abbey is here. Where is Diane Abbey? Getting breakfast. It's a long-time interest of her and her family and her husband, Arthur Abbey, who is the chair of the board of New York Law School, and we're very fortunate that they have shown such interest in this important topic. Professor Carlin Meyer, who is the director, is over here, and she will be the person running the program here at the law school. Today, of course, we have Judge Kaye speaking, and we are extremely fortunate. She's very gracious in accepting. She asked, will people come in August? And people have come in August for you, Judge Kaye. Her record in New York State is really singular. Barnard College, NYU Law School, one of the first partners in a major law firm, women partners, 25 years on the Court of Appeals, 15 years as the Chief Judge of the state of New York. And her accomplishments are so many. The one that I still marvel at is the one about jury service. I thought in my lifetime that would never change. Nobody I knew served on a jury. They all had some statutory or other reason not to serve. And Judge Kaye just said that is ridiculous. We need to change that, and it was not easy to change, but she did, and now everyone serves on a jury, and that is really an important aspect of democracy, and it would not have happened without her leadership in that. So today she's going to speak about juvenile justice, an exceedingly important topic, and we could not be more proud than to have Judge Kaye at our podium. Judge Kaye.
Thank you so much, and welcome and good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking the law school and by thanking Ross in particular for inviting me today. You might be interested to know that this invitation came about a couple of months ago when Ross and Alice and I all found ourselves at the theater one evening seeing Race, which we enjoyed so much that when Ross invited me to be here today, I accepted. Although I did say, is anyone else going to be here in August? But isn't New York City a remarkable place? In fact, I'm looking at my neighbor and friend, President Jeremy Travis, right here, and I'm not going to go through the room, but New York City is a great place, and justice is a great subject. And Daniel Webster once said, the greatest interest of man upon earth is justice. And I think the statement is well borne out by the astonishing level of popular interest today in justice. You can watch Law and Order around the clock. You can take breaks from Law and Order with Scott Turnow and John Grisham. And you know, just the other day I bought a new book by Grisham called Theodore Boone, Kid Lawyer. Have you seen it around yet? It's for kids between like the ages of 9 and 15. I thought the perfect subject for my 12-year-old grandson, and so I got it and I began reading it to him, but he went off to swim and do other things, and I did finish the book. And I think it's a very good region. You know, you just can't start too early. And obviously, that's a good message about today, too. You can't start too early. I'm absolutely delighted to find a group that enjoys chewing on the subject of justice for breakfast. Don't you all know that it's the summer and that this is officially part of the Labor Day weekend? So I'm honored to talk to you today, especially about a subject that is very near and dear to my own heart, and by coincidence, a really pressing subject these days in New York and throughout the nation, and that is the subject of juvenile justice. Forgive me, please, if I spend just a minute talking about myself. Nearly 50 years as a lawyer, 47 years to be precise as a lawyer. Never in my 47 years have I seen such an interest in juvenile justice. Nearly 50 years as a lawyer and more than quarter century as a judge of the great New York State courts, 15 of those years, as you've heard from Ross, as chief judge. So that's 3 separate roles I've been privileged to hold: as a lawyer, then a judge of New York State's High Court, and then the chief judge. But I have to tell you, when I speak of 50 and then 25 years, that's not a total of 75 years as a lawyer and judge. You know, there was a little tiny bit of overlapping there. But by any measure, it was a long and much-loved entanglement with our justice system, and I do hope it continues far into the future. So don't be misled for a moment when you see the letters R-E-T after my name. That does not stand for retired. It stands for retooled, it stands for retitled, it stands for ready to transform, and my heart, I have to tell you, is in the area of juvenile justice. Now, you heard from Ross about my entanglement with the delights of commercial litigation, big law firms, mergers gone bad and contracts challenged and businesses imperiled, and it was all really fascinating, especially for a young woman back in the early 1960s. But somewhere along the way, I found my true self, and now I think of those early years. I refer to them as my wasted youth. Imagine what I could have done had I been awakened to where the real needs and importance for lawyers is, and that would be in the area of juvenile justice. What I encountered during my own cherished years in the courts, and especially as chief judge, was positively eye-opening and heart-rending. The genuinely wasted youths, the luckless and unfortunate kids who grow up in our courts and in our agencies, abandoned, totally abandoned in one way or another, shuffled from one place to another, school to school, not a single person to encourage them, to mentor them, to believe in them, to teach them to tie a tie or obtain a birth certificate or citizenship papers or social security cards or school supplies. When we were building a new family court in Queens some years ago, the architect excitedly explained to me that he had carefully researched the operation of family courts all through New York, and he concluded that the design of a family court properly and necessarily begins with very large and comfortable public waiting areas. Because the dockets are so massive and the waits are so long, he totally broke my heart. How sad that is, and how true that is. And indeed, the court's waiting areas are very beautiful, and I might add they are fully utilized, despite the best efforts of our judges and our court personnel, and talk about heroes, they are true heroes, to deal with their utterly staggering caseloads. And if the filled court waiting areas are not nightmarish enough, just take a look at the grim statistics, the court statistics, and all the statistics beyond the courts. Today, the rate of incarceration in the United States is several times higher than other Western nations, heavily concentrated on 20 and 30-year-old minority men, and now more and more young women, too. And more teenage pregnancies, the cycle starting anew. Is this America, I ask you? We know that the average annual cost to incarcerate a person is about 3 times what we spend educating a child. We know that close to a third of all kids suspended from school a few times before the spring of their second year of high school just drop out of school. We know that a majority of state prisoners are high school dropouts. We know that about half of all inmates have children. Some are even the sole custodial parent. Now, that's a lot of broken families, and that's a lot of devastated children. It's what the New York Times has referred to as the incarceration generation. So I ask you again, is this America? Once a leader in juvenile justice, today the United States is almost third world in its punitive approach to juvenile crime. And by juvenile crime, by the way, I refer not simply to armed robberies and homicides, but to school scuffles and vandalism, writing on a desk, for example, that's a juvenile crime, petty larceny, and similar, what you might call adolescent behavior that can earn a first-time offender removal from school, friends, and family, and time in one of our facilities that was recently heartily condemned by the United States Department of Justice and others. And by the way, these commitments aren't only expensive, they are also proven to be overwhelmingly ineffective. We know that incarceration more often leads not to rehabilitation, it leads to recidivism. In fact, we know more about adolescent behavior and adolescent brain development today than ever before. We know more about juveniles' impulsiveness and their difficulty thinking in terms of long-term benefits and their reluctance to trust adults. And here I am drawing on Justice Kennedy's opinion for the United States Supreme Court just a short time ago in Graham against Florida. That's the juvenile life without parole case that was decided just this past term. We know the science. We know it. We know all the statistics. We've seen all the charts and all the graphs. The science today is voluminous. We're just not using it. We're not using it intelligently and constructively to deal with adolescent behavior and adolescent misbehavior. Shame on us. Shame on us. Shame on us for doing this to our kids, for greasing the downward spiral of their lives. Shame on us for doing this to ourselves and to our nation's absolutely most precious resource. We, after all, depend on the strength of the next generations for our future in this rapidly changing and challenging world. How good it is that The Secret is out today, that from every quarter, the United States Department of Justice, our governor, our mayor, our chief judge, our fabulous New York City commissioners, the popular press, there are calls, finally, at long last, for juvenile justice, justice for juveniles. Real justice for juveniles was a recent New York Times editorial headline, and momentum at long last is building for systemic reform. Indeed, I think it is fair to say that today there is a clamor for change, and this is the moment. We simply must seize the moment. Now, I don't exaggerate when I say these words, and I've brought with me just a couple of examples from my life in the past couple of weeks, starting with the New York Law Journal, which arrives on my desk every morning. August 24, state begins talks on overhauling more youth prisons. And Jeremy, of course, they're talking about the wonderful study you headed. But then I opened the American Bar Association Journal, the last one to arrive on my desk. And the featured article is What's the Matter with Kids Today, which I refer to all of you. It's focused on the Supreme Court's recent Roper, that's the juvenile death penalty case, and Graham, the juvenile life without parole case, and in particular, all of the brain research that has been centered on adolescents. And you'll see a large quote in here which strikes right at the heart. The brain of a teenager is like a car with a powerful gas pedal and weak brakes. And then just the other day, this issue arrived. I don't know how many of you received this magazine. I have to admit I haven't read it with the zeal that I have been attacking this issue. It's a magazine called Daedalus, and it's the Journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, summer 2010. Ross, I think I'll leave it with you, and perhaps you could make available this article. The entire issue is on mass incarceration, and it is a powerful, powerful statement. But what especially has drawn my attention is an article by Jeffrey Fagan, The Contradictions of Juvenile Crime and Punishment. Many, many power-packed pages, but what I intend to spend a lot of time on are 80 pages of 80 footnotes in this on the subject of juvenile incarceration and the hopelessness of the present system here in the United States, with lots and lots and lots of focus on New York State. So I commend it to all of you. On Tuesday, just today is Friday, on Tuesday my emails exploded with friends directing my attention to an excellent op-ed by Commissioners Mattingly and Schiraldi entitled "Wrong Way to Punish Youths," urging collaborative programs to close the abhorrent youth detention facilities, to realign state dollars, and to reallocate savings to local governments so they can create meaningful programs to improve youth outcomes. And yesterday, I learned that yet another article would be printed by these outstanding commissioners, Building a Safe and Effective Juvenile Justice System, and that's going to appear in the Law Journal maybe today or next week, making the same utterly powerful and irrefutable argument about our current system of juvenile incarceration. They speak, in fact, of one entire facility we have in the state of New York, the Tryon Boys Residential Center, where not a single youth is housed, but 60 state employees continue to maintain that institution at taxpayer expense. So you know I don't exaggerate one iota, don't exaggerate for a moment when I say that now is the moment, this is the moment for genuine reform in the area of juvenile justice. I admire and I applaud every single one of the ongoing efforts and studies, and I urge us all to support these efforts and even more to challenge ourselves, each of us, to think of more ways, additional ways. They're all good ways to reroute the deadly cradle to prison, school to prison, placement to prison pipelines. The fact is, the winds of change may be blowing with respect to juvenile incarceration, but the winds of change need to blow all through the juvenile justice system, not just to the gates of our youth prisons. Now, we need to prevent juvenile delinquency. We need to keep kids out of the justice system. We need to keep kids out of the courts. The courts are just not a good place for kids to grow up in. We need to find ways to keep children in their homes, in their schools, with their families, with their friends, and we need to provide them with services in their communities so that they are able to flourish. We need to create a whole host of meaningful interventions, off-ramps, that will hold young people accountable for their behavior, to be sure, but at the same time, we have to offer them the structure, the support, the positive relationships with adults that they need to have so that they can hold up their heads and nurture their dreams. Now, I don't have a comprehensive list of interventions. I have to tell you, if I had one, I would not have waited until today to reveal it, much as it would have been a nice thing to do today, right, Ross? But what I do know is that we have to deal with kids' issues not just at the state of incarceration, detention, and placement. We need to deal with kids' issues long before they reach the age and the moment and the stage of school suspension and expulsion and court referral. There are just so many good ideas and good ways to intervene early, and that includes good ideas from the courts, another voice that absolutely has to be solicited and heard and listened to. Now, my own thoughts and my own energies are centered on schools, on education, and on building school justice partnerships to prevent juvenile delinquency and catch kids before they reach that point. For myself, I am especially interested in the subject of school-based youth courts, and I'm so thrilled that Dr. Jeffrey Butts is here today, one of the great voices and leading voices for a decade or more on the subject of youth courts. When I see Jeff, I'm encouraged and heartened, and I know this will be a great idea, which we can work on together. Now that he's at John Jay and Jeremy is here, Jeremy, you don't mind if I have Jeff, do you?
I say no.
Done. How terrific. Now, youth courts, and I know you here at the law school are familiar with youth courts, but I'll tell the others and let them in on our little intervention here. This is where peers, instead of police or judges, can intervene early in the life of a kid where some trouble has already manifested itself. Youth courts train teenagers to serve as judges and jurors and attorneys. Youth courts teach them about the operation of our justice system, but they then handle real-life scrapes with the law that have been committed by their schoolmates, like school scuffles and stealing from a neighbor's locker and maybe a little graffiti or vandalism. And they administer meaningful sanctions like community service, behavioral modification classes. They can involve the private bar as well as mentors to see that kids get on the right track and stay on the right track. Now, I am very proud that we have first-rate youth courts up and running in places around New York State. We have a wonderful one in Red Hook, in Harlem at our Harlem Justice Center, in Staten Island, and I've met recently with District Attorney Vance, and we're in the planning stages for more youth courts in New York City. I think that this is a truly great idea, which I hope we can together make into a reality. In recent months, I visited the youth court in Staten Island, and I visited the youth court in Rochester. I've watched the teenagers who have been specially trained to play the roles of judges and jurors and attorneys. With the consent of the local district attorney in both places, these young people meet a couple of evenings each week to listen to, evaluate, weigh the cases of their peers who have been accused of illegal behavior, nonviolent but yet illegal behavior, like disorderly conduct and public drinking, and graffiti and vandalism. I saw, for example, a case of James. He was caught shopping, it's not his real name, at the local mall. And he was sentenced by the youth court to perform community service. And Brianna, then, I use that name because it's my friend Judge George's daughter, but believe me, it wasn't her. Arrested for trespass and marijuana possession, and sentenced by her peers to write a letter of apology, attend a workshop on how to make better life decisions. If they complete their sentences as ordered, the cases against them will be dismissed. And what the youth court offers them, these teenagers, is in effect a second chance, an opportunity to avoid a criminal conviction and to pay back the community they have harmed through their behavior. It seems to me that in responding to youth crime, youth court provides just the right message, and maybe even more importantly, the right messenger. The young people who have their cases heard by these courts learn that they are accountable for their actions, but they learn also, maybe for the first time, Commissioner Carrion, so nice to see you, that you and I have spoken about these subjects before. I have not said anything that you have not previously heard. That they are accountable for their actions, and they learn that they're valued members of the community, that if they take responsibility for their actions, they can move forward with their lives. And all of this is communicated not by distant adult authority figures, but by what's known as credible messengers, other young people who have been there and done that. I believe that youth court has the potential. This is a project I hope to nurture alongside your many wonderful projects, Commissioner Carrion. I believe that youth court has the potential to educate young people about the law, to encourage a greater sense of civic engagement, and to offer important early intervention for misbehaving teenagers. And that's why this is what I have chosen for the moment as my investment in spreading the model of youth courts across the state. But there are so many great ideas. There are so many good ideas. The one thing we have to be sure to do is to be in this together, coordinately, cooperatively, government and advocates and law students and the private sector. And we know that the time for action is now. This is the moment. I encourage the law students here in particular to get involved with projects like the Diane Abbey Law Center and the Center for New York City Law, founded by my friend Ross. These wonderful organizations are at our fingertips, especially here at the law school, and every one of you should take advantage, full advantage of these unique opportunities. I assure you that your contributions today can and will make a world of difference for you and for the people you serve. My message today is that we clearly need to remain open to change and to be ready for comprehensive intervention and change. No closed doors, no pushing people away or ideas away. This is just all too important. We have to open our minds and open our thinking to new ways. This is the time, this is the moment for dramatic change. I know this is true, and you do too, because we have no better evidence than the fact that so many of you are gathered here on this Labor Day holiday weekend. So remember Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. That's what we have to do here in New York. That's what we have to do together. It's in our hands, all of us working together, to build the partnerships and the interventions and the off-ramps from disaster so that the dreams of our children and the dreams of our nation can be fulfilled. And that's my message of this morning. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And an inspirational message it is, and an important message. At this time, we always open up the microphones for questions, but I think the topic is so stimulating and the challenge you've thrown down is so direct, and there's so many people in the room who have thought about it and are participating in issues. I open up for comments by people who are working in the field, and the commissioners are here, others are here who work. I would love to have some comments, ideas, particularly response on youth courts, but other ideas that might be worth talking about. So this is a charrette. We should.
It's a wonderful idea.
Let's have a conversation.
I like that.
And not just questions to the judge, but we welcome those as well. The microphones are here. No one is standing up. Come on. And others, I would hope others will very soon.
Thank you so much for your reflections and for your life of service and continuing service. Richard Jordan, the president of Concerned Citizens Speak. Have you given any thought about the use of the $700 million of Race to the Top money in terms of this type of education for our schools statewide? Thank you.
Well, I certainly give a lot of thought to the use of money in every constructive way. Clearly, we will. My interests center on schools, catching kids when there are early signs of difficulty and seeing that they stay in their schools, and also anything that enhances that objective is something that definitely has my attention and obviously has yours, and I know where I'll find a ready partner. Thank you. And I want especially to introduce Dr. Butts, and maybe he would stand up for just a moment and say something. I say, for me, I don't know about all the rest of you, but I believe in serendipity, don't you? I mean, I don't totally rely on serendipity, but I mean, we need to do a lot of hard work, but serendipity matters too. And I guess it was one of the days when I was scratching my head and thinking, how do we get this youth court model going? It's just so frustrating. You know, the universal proposition in humanity, It can be summarized in a single word: pushback. You know, you put out a good idea, well, you just can be sure that everybody's going to tear it to bits and criticize it. And one day, when I was sitting there scratching my head, I learned that Jeff Butts was packing his bags and moving to New York City and affiliating with the great John Jay. Could there be a better sign from the heavens? Bringing along his wonderful wife, who's been my friend for many, many years too. Now that Jeff is here, we have tangible evidence that this is going to be a remarkably successful and wonderful initiative. So say a word, Jeff. Tell them what you've been doing.
Well, I must say I'm happy I came here this morning.
You can raise the microphone up.
Okay.
Yeah, we've given you 15 minutes.
That's on. The microphone is on.
That's on? Okay. Well, as I said to you recently, I really believe in the model of youth courts as an early intervention for young people who are just starting to become involved with police and courts. So we know who they are. The system has noticed them, but they're not really adjudicated yet. They're not deep in. But as I also said, I think it's important that we develop youth courts in a way that leads to a path in which we can start to refer to them as an evidence-based program. I've done some research on youth courts, other people have as well, but we tend to do these large studies based on the question, does it work, does it not work? So we compare youth court to alternative methods of handling or traditional methods of handling young offenders. And what we need to do is start doing studies that are smaller and focused on questions that we can answer with high degrees of rigor, so little experiments, because I have personal beliefs about what the best model is, and other people do too. But until we resolve some of those disputes and nail down the key components of effectiveness, they'll continue, youth courts, the whole idea of youth courts will continue to be seen as a promising model, a good idea for which there's no evidence. And in this environment, if you don't have rock solid evidence behind your program, you eventually lose the competition for funding. And I'm not, even though I'm a researcher, I'm not one who believes that research should control everything or we should make all decisions based upon evidence. But if you're not in that game, you eventually get squeezed out. And so youth court is one example, and there are other examples of good early intervention programs.
Like what?
To me, anything that involves practical, skill-based youth development. Attaching kids to the workforce, young people, not just kids, but young people, so that they have some sense of how to plug into the labor force in the future. And also, I think we should remember that these are often teenagers and adolescents, and much of their life revolves around friends and fun. And if you have a program that doesn't allow young people to have fun in some way, they're not going to want to come back. So I think it's possible, as every parent knows, as every school system has known, involving kids in things like music and arts and sports, physical activity in general, is a good way to get them attached to what you're doing. And then you sneak in the lessons and the pro-social development, skill-based activities along with it. But too many of our programs are based on the premise that the best way to reach a young person is to force them to comply with what we want them to do. And I don't know a lot of teenagers, but the ones I've met don't naturally respond to that. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'd say as I've said, and the theme of my remarks this morning is about this being the moment for some meaningful change. And the part you missed, Commissioner Carrion, is you know how heartfelt my commitment is to everything you are doing with respect to detention of juveniles in our really cruel and inhumane system, and we support you totally in all of the efforts. But I have moved beyond that because I know this issue is in such good hands. And where I am trying to place the focus is on the steps before juvenile delinquency, early trouble, early signs of trouble. And I think some of Dr. Butts's thoughts are excellent. And I say my theme of the day has been now is the moment. But since I walked up the street with my Starbucks buddy over there, who is shortly going to introduce herself, she laid on my plate another subject that is fascinating, which is the movement from my years in law school of ho-hum kind of thinking to the fact that what we have today is experiential education in law schools. And this New York Law School being a prime example of experiential education. So I think when Dr. Butts mentions a couple of ideas, I think of the enormous pool and reservoir of strength and energy and talent that we have in our law schools now moving from the books into the community, and how what a great idea it would be to engage the students at wherever they are in some of these projects. So, my Starbucks partner.
So let me introduce myself. My name is Carlin Meyer, and I am the director of the Diane Abbey Law Center for Children and Families. It's a new center at New York Law School, and I want to endorse one particular thing that Judge Kaye had to say, and that is the importance of serendipity. It so happens that this past summer, some of my students and I visited the youth courts and met with two groups, one from Red Hook and one from Greenpoint, and talked about ways in which, through experiential education, we could become involved in supporting the youth courts. And we also developed a plan to have a symposium on juvenile justice reform this spring. I'm going to give you the date so you can write it in your books, April 29th. And many of the people we had talked about involving in that symposium are now sitting in this room. So we will be contacting you very soon.
See, it's
You will
risky.
hear
It's
from
risky to
us.
come to these. I mean, like going to the theater, you have to be careful. This shows.
That's exactly right. So just be aware, write down in your books, April 29th, expect us to be contacting you to talk about youth courts and many other forms of juvenile justice reform. One of the things we've done already is involve some of the students who are participating in those courts, who will be coming to the symposium to let us know their view of the youth courts. And we hope to see you all. That's really all I'm here to say, other than please do contact us, because what Judge Kaye just said about students being a wonderful resource, all of the Abbey Center students who have enrolled now to be full-time associates of the center will next year be doing projects. We call them capstone projects, and we ask them to do something that is not just a research paper of some kind, but is a project which will make a serious difference to the world of children and families. So we
Thank
hope
you.
you'll let us know if you have projects that you would like law student help
Thank
with.
you. I mean, I think we just have to challenge ourselves to be creative and imaginative. I had dinner the other night with a prominent judge, I might say a federal judge, a graduate of the New York City public school system. And we got naturally onto the subject of juvenile justice. I always manage to find myself on that subject. And I was shocked to learn that his school, that he's never called on by his public school to assist in any way. Isn't that amazing that we don't think of the resources that are right at hand, but how we could use alums of all sorts, high school alums and college alums, and bring them to the aid in this really pressing situation. We need them. So we need great ideas. We need creativity. The one thing we don't need is pushback. And I agree with you, Dr. Butts, we need the evidence too. I believe in serendipity, but we can't limit ourselves to serendipity. We need evidence. You're absolutely right. Now, my new friend, Roger.
Roger Hers. My father, Alfred E. Hers, was a class of 1923, and he was a youth court judge in the 8th grade at PS 177, I think it was. You mentioned the Daedalus article. Is that or similar online? Because this sounds like
Hey, don't ask me about online.
Oh, okay. Or
When I was asked if I needed PowerPoints for today, I said, what is that? I'm joking. I'm joking.
it would be very useful by way of follow-up to have access.
I think you all want to read this article. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff.
I'll take care of it.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Because you can't buy this on the newsstands, right? And it has no illustration.
Commissioner Carey on the office, just tell us what she's doing.
Yes.
Hello. Thank you so much for this morning's talk. My name is Dr. Ann Clayson. I'm clergy leader at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. And we have, since January, been involved in putting together a coalition, Justice for Juveniles, a call to ethical action, reaching out to faith-based organizations and community-based organizations. So I want to speak on behalf of those faith-based organizations who can do a lot for children.
Now,
And-
where is my friend Karen?
I'm here.
Karen.
I was going to talk about
Now
that.
talk,
We need
now
to
talk,
talk.
talk about,
We'll talk.
no, but talk about serendipity. If you
Okay.
don't mind, just let Karen say this one thing.
Good.
And, you'll be.
What I was getting up to talk about is that as an acting Supreme Court judge, I and Judge James, who's sitting here, are assigned on weekends to do the juvenile detention, a new program, when family court's not in service, to kids come in front of us, and we have to decide whether to put them in a secured, unsecured, or back into the home. What I've discovered, I haven't had a chance to talk to Judge James about
And
this.
just to be clear, Karen, it's
Yeah.
not so that we can detain more of them over the weekend. It's just so that we can send some of them back home if that becomes possible.
That's the theory.
Yes.
It's not what happens a lot. And one of the reasons why it doesn't happen is because a lot of the kids come from communities of very broken homes, very people who are not well. And recently, about just this past month, I sat there and I called a mother and said, could she come in? She had asthma, very sick, no other adults in the house, and she couldn't. And the kid was arrested for loitering in a New York Housing Authority building. I mean, you can't even go into the discussion as to whether there was probable cause. That's not the issue in these hearings. Bottom line is, I called up the mother and I said, do you have a pastor? And she said yes. And I said, can I have his number? I called the pastor. I said, would you be willing to come down and pick the child up, to bring them home? And would you be willing to sit down with Judge Melissa Jackson, who's now the head of New York County Criminal Court, and talk about developing a group of pastors who, until the following week when the child will be seen in family court, rather than put the child in Spotsford or any of these other institutions, could serve, because as Hillary Clinton has so aptly taken over the phrase, it takes a community, a village to raise a child. And the pastor agreed, came down, and I was able to not put that child in. I just have to say, the person representing Corp Counsel that day, who's the one who represents the state in these things, was furious with me, and she said, we don't do things like that here. I said, well, then you can come up and wear the robe. I'm wearing
And
the robe.
isn't that the theme of the day? The way we do things around here, we don't want to do them that way anymore. We want
So
to.
I would love to work with you about
So
that.
now I ask you, is that the perfect first paragraph to what you were going to
Absolutely,
say?
and I want to encourage, if you are members of a congregation, please speak to your clergy, please speak to your social justice committees, and say, we need to do something. We've held a number, in fact, it's good to see Jeffrey
But
here.
I'm going to
and-
turn the challenge back onto you.
Yeah.
Because I've been before audiences like this where there have been doctors and mental health
Right.
professionals and all, and they say, they've stood at the microphone and said, we are ready to help you. Well,
You have to actually do
take
it.
the
No,
initiative,
absolutely.
too.
And let me tell you
it's
what the
not a
new-
one-way street.
Absolutely. Let me tell you what the New York Society for Ethical Culture is doing. We are partnering with the Dome Project to offer tutoring and mentoring. And I think where we need to fill in is these alternatives to incarceration. The diversion programs last, for example, the diversion program is 60 days. Very intensive, but then what happens to these 13 to 15-year-olds at the end of the 60-day period?
Okay, so
we
one great
can take
idea,
them-
one great idea I have is that you're sitting right at the right hand of Jeremy, your neighbors, your neighbors, the ethical
You
culture.
couldn't make it to our first conference,
But your neighbors, and so I think exchanging the information
absolutely.
and meeting with and figuring out how do we systematize some of these wonderful ideas.
Well, and walking the talk. It's not enough just to talk, and I think if every congregation would have a mentoring or tutoring program and would partner with a group, as we're partnering with the Dome Project, we could see a lot of action. And as you say, the stars are aligned right now, things are really happening, but each one of us has to do something. So, thank you.
Well, you have next week. You can meet with Jeremy.
Great. All right.
And Gladys, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just bringing us up to date a little on your truly heroic efforts to correct this abysmal situation that we have at hand.
Well, Hello, Judge, and once again, I want to
Hello
apologize for
again.
being late. But I do want to say that the progress we have made in the state and our ability to close facilities and really our work to transform the juvenile justice system, that part of which I'm responsible for, is only possible with the collaboration and alignment of so many people that have been here. But also those alternative programs is really what has enabled me to depopulate so many of my facilities. So that really is important. And I am as focused on doing that end of the work as I am in that front end of narrowing that front door into my deep end of the juvenile justice system. And I think for us, it's really important to also focus to ensure that only those most dangerous young people need to be removed from their communities. And we really need to focus on creating those alternatives and working to make sure that those young people that don't belong in my system never get near that system at all. And just to bring everybody up to date, you know that we just finalized our settlement with the Department of Justice. We will shortly be finalizing our implementation plan, which will be approved by the Department of Justice. The monitors have been assigned for oversight of the system, and we have about $18.5 million to start doing work to really improve the conditions within our facilities. But what is really important is for us to work together, really identify the resources we need to divert as many young people here.
Is the faith-based community part of your efforts as
They
well? Because
are.
I'm including you in this meeting with
Absolutely.
President
Well, I
Trump.
actually was able to make it to their first conference and
See,
really
what I
work
miss most
together.
about being the former chief judge is I just used to be able to push people around.
Yes, yes, that's true. That's true. And so, yes. So we continue to do the work, and there are some wonderful partners here that work with us to be able to do that. And it really does take a partnership with the judiciary, which has been a great, great partnership with the state and probation and the local. New York City has done a wonderful job. There's much, much more that needs to be done, particularly, as you point out, to divert young people from coming into the system. The youth courts are a wonderful, wonderful idea, and what we need to is find ways that all of us together can support the development of more youth court and really involving young people in understanding that they can make better choices. And as adults, we have the responsibility of supporting them, and we need to really step up to do that. And so I continue to work with you in whatever role you are, as you know that.
And the same goes for me.
And
We-
so I'm looking forward to working with all of you in this room to make sure that we have the model juvenile justice system, which is a really small system that only houses those young people that can't remain safely in the community. So I look forward to continuing to do that work.
Thank you, Commissioner Carrion. Thank you so much. Arthur, my friend Arthur Abbey,
Yes, thanks.
somehow related to the great Diane Abbey.
Thank you. I wanted to know, where does New York State stand in relation to the other states? Are we way behind? Are there other states that are way ahead, or what's the situation there?
What a good question. I think one thing that used to break my heart and still does is that we spend so much time visiting other states. We were visiting Missouri. Missouri seized all the headlines for a long time. I don't know, Commissioner Carrion, how many times have you been to Missouri? 3 times? We're all going to Missouri, and many, to see what they're doing in Missouri, what they're doing in Michigan, what they're doing in Chicago, what they're doing. And to me, this is just senseless. Why aren't they all coming here to see what we're doing here? So I think clearly you have to say that. And I kept a quote. I was going to bring it today, and I didn't. I keep it like posted on my wall about it's actually the MacArthur Foundation that funds a lot and really very creative and wonderful nationwide projects. And during my years as chief judge, I met with Pew and I met with Casey and I met with a whole lot of places that indeed do a lot of funding in New York, but they always picked other states in the end. And this little article says that what they looked for was prominence. We're certainly prominent. Diversity. We have a lot of diversity. And I figure this is where we fumble and fall, readiness for change. I mean, I think I have to conclude that they felt we were not sufficiently ready for change and therefore funded 10, 15, 20 other places. So, but I think now we are ready for change, and we want the visits to New York. It's not the tourism we're looking for, right? We want people to come to see what we are doing in New York, and under the great leadership that we have now, I think we will have more and more visitors coming to New York to see the terrific thing. It's fine that we learn from others. Always we should be learning from others. But enough visits to other states. People should come here to see the great things that we are doing in the area of juvenile justice. We are the model. We need to make ourselves the model. And you will help us in that, won't you? Yes.
Good morning, Judge.
Good morning.
My name is Cassandra Frederick, and I'm actually a student of Mark Rederick, who actually...
Say no more.
So it gives me great joy that you are championing working in the field of juvenile justice. As someone who went to Cornell and worked at Lansing before the detention center, and went to Columbia School of Social Work and was a social worker at MS-201.
It's okay.
Juvenile justice is something that is very close and dear to my heart, as I have a lot of friends that have gone through the juvenile justice system and have not made their way out of the juvenile justice system. Some of the things that that I wanted to ask you about is the policies around zero tolerance in schools that usually gets, once they make an infraction, it's zero tolerance and the student is out of school, displaced, moved to a suspension site, and this is happening all the time, being put into these suspension schools that are
Terrible,
not conducive
don't you
to
think
their
so?
learning.
Just terrible?
It's one of the hardest things that I've worked with as being a social worker and a counselor. And also students walking through metal detectors every day and criminalizing the youth. I think there are a lot of different subtle things that are happening in schools that are criminalizing these youth, which make them more dangerous or make them think they're as dangerous, which gets them really tied up into the system. So I'd like to know what some of your comments are, and I work with the Drug Policy Alliance, which is trying to figure out ways on how to do drug education in a way that is beyond zero tolerance and talks about safety. And I know sometimes it's just really not about the drugs, it's about the situations that people are going through, because even if drugs weren't there, it would be something else. And the criminal justice system, we have to move into a public health approach in learning how to deal with the youth and move away from criminalizing and to actually talking about understanding the children.
Well, drawing a line from my old life, I affirm everything you've said. While I chose today to focus on youth courts, my interest generally is on schools, and particularly this zero tolerance policy and busting kids out of school, because we know what happens when there's been a suspension. So often kids, that's just the end, and they don't come back. And I did do a conference several months ago called Building School Justice Partnerships, Keeping Kids in School and Out of Courts. And I'm following up on that right now, working with the police department and with the New York City school system. And there again, we have many wonderful examples in other parts of the United States, Birmingham, Alabama, and we brought the judge here, Judge Huff, who took the leadership role in negotiating a protocol among the schools and the police, which would define when the police would be brought in, when a child would be arrested. I think we need to pursue that avenue and find more collaborative ways, and that is going forward, and to have a little working group, and that is going forward. But you're absolutely right. We definitely need to focus on the zero tolerance, whether it's zero anymore in New York State or not. It's still, that is an area that's very, very problematic. I hope I can count on you to help too.
Yeah, I'll meet you after.
Okay, fair enough. Joseph,
Good morning, Judge.
Good
It is
morning.
always an honor and pleasure to hear you speak. I wanted to ask,
the last time Joseph and I were together, you did a book drive for children's books down here. Would you do it again?
sure, absolutely, for you, Judge, of course.
Yes, and the books all went to the children's centers and the family courts, and I can't tell you how important and valuable. You see, every idea, everything helps. We don't need to find the single comprehensive solution. We need to find a lot of avenues to redress this really horrible, scandalous problem. Okay, Joseph, your turn.
What I wanted to ask was, as someone who was a teenager not too long ago, yes, I know, I found very instrumental in becoming who I am today was the excellent civics education that I had. And I know that right now we are at an abominable nadir right now in terms of civics education. And I wanted to ask you, and also pledge myself in this, what do you think we can do to use civics education as preventative medicine in juvenile justice and also as rehabilitative medicine in juvenile justice? Because I know for me, the day that I realized that the Supreme Court of the United States and later the New York Court of Appeals could exercise the power of judicial review to counter what everybody in the state had voted on, it was instrumental to me, and I can't imagine there aren't other people who are young who would be similarly enthralled by that.
Okay, so I'll assign that subject to you, Joseph. I hope you're taking notes, Ross, on all of these projects that we have going. And as you know, Justice O'Connor has made it the focus of her life to educate the next generation in the justice system. It's it's one of the wonderful things I think about youth courts too, that it does help kids understand how our justice system works, and so I'm clearly interested in that too. But you're right on target. Excellent idea, and we definitely need to promote it, and I'm counting on you for the books.
Yes, ma'am. Next time I will bring Stargirl, and I'll have to go see Justice Souter and Chief Justice Broderick in New Hampshire because they are working on that.
Good. Yes, Jeremy. So, Jeremy, tell us about what you're doing in the juvenile justice field.
I'm trying to imagine where this pushback might come from. So just to think down the road a bit. So I applaud you, as you know, and just to say it publicly, just how wonderful to hear your voice so focused and so clear on this topic, and to hear the clarion call for youth courts as what you're championing now, because with you behind it, things are highly likely to happen. So, but you mentioned pushback. So I'm imagining where the pushback will come from, and what your sort of candid assessment of that. So I want to raise these issues by telling a story, a brief one. A person who works for me has a young son who's in the New York City school system, and he was maybe 7th grade or so, and we all know the no cell phone policy in the Department of Education. He came to school with his cell phone. His teacher saw his cell phone and came to take his cell phone away from him. He reacted by taking her cell phone away from her, running down the hallway, and she called the police. And the police on duty reacted by arresting this young man for theft, taking him into the system, taking him to the precinct, calling his mother, and taking him in the system. He was then prosecuted by the Corporation Counsel. Many adjournments later, some intervention from me and others. We got a very good pro bono attorney to represent him. And this all started because there wasn't the approach that you're talking about, which is that these minor infractions need a different way of being handled. But the environment within which that case arose is this, the previous speaker gets credit, I think, for triggering this thought, is this zero tolerance environment. So we have in the city a set of realities that affect young people, high levels of interaction with the police on the street. We've tripled the number of stop and frisks in this city in the last 4 years, heavily concentrated in communities of color. So those are the realities of young people growing up. And then they come to school, and there's a zero tolerance policy that often, as in the case of my young friend, lead to interventions in the system. And we have, I can't comment generally in the Corporation Counsel's office, but in this case, a sort of no surrender sort of attitude. So this wonderful idea that you're now promoting comes to us in an environment where there's a lot of a different way of thinking that's defended as being the right way of thinking about how to interact, how the system should interact with young people. So we have a number of agencies and really sort of philosophies that we're going to have to overcome to make this happen. And those are pretty powerful sort of countervailing forces. So the pushback is going to be pretty strong.
Huge.
And I'm just wondering, just your sort of clear-eyed assessment of what it's going to take to sort of move through that other reality.
Well, I heartily endorse everything you've said, and indeed experienced it in the wake of my November 13 fabulous session, full-day session at Skadden Arps, promoting school justice partnerships, having brought people from Los Angeles and Birmingham, Alabama, and Syracuse. Yes, I brought everybody together, and there was the launch, and no, you can't do that. Stay out of my bailiwick, don't come here, don't come there. Absolutely. I see it. There's pushback all over. So are we going to be negative? Are we going to just stop in our tracks? Are we going to allow the naysayers just to stop us dead in our tracks? Are we? No, absolutely not. We're going to be wise and try to build our coalitions intelligently and pursue ideas that we believe are good ideas, drawing on people willing to give us the evidence that we need to make our case. The case you described, interestingly, I witnessed in the what's called teen court in Rochester, New York. And indeed, the police officer was there to testify, and indeed, the kids examined and cross-examined him. That was a model. It was a cell phone, and that was a model overseen by a judge. These teen court, youth court, peer courts have different models. Pretty good. They did a great job. And I met afterwards with the kid was there, his mother was there. I mean, it was a pretty nice lesson for everybody, and the judge was just great. And there was a teen jury that formulated the punishment that this child would receive for pursuing his cell phone. He didn't take back the cell phone. The vice principal took his cell phone and wouldn't give it back, and he got a little out of control. So I imagine this happens every day. And in the course of my organizing my symposium on promoting school justice partnerships, I learned about PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Systems, and we have some of those going here in New York City too. And I've visited schools that are functioning around positive behavior intervention systems. We just need to look for the good things. And are we believers or are we naysayers? We are believers. We are believers. We can do it. We can, yes.
Let me just step in a second. We like to end this at 9:30.
Oh, nuts.
But I'm not going to end it. Because some people do have to get back to work. I want to acknowledge that, but because there are people standing and the topic is so rich, I think we should continue, but you
And
should
Commissioner
know.
Schiraldi, so
Yes.
nice to see you.
I'll yield to you.
And Judge Hepner, one of my heroes, really. Tell us what you're doing, Paula.
I feel the need to end on a bit of a higher note here for juvenile justice because there are some things that people will be coming to New York to see. We are a leader in at least one sector of the population in juvenile justice. For the past 6 years, I've had the good fortune in our family court in New York to lead a work group focused on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender children. And I've had the good fortune to be on the advisory committee of the first national project studying LGBT kids in detention centers and in detention facilities in the juvenile justice system. And the report that was just issued earlier this year shows us that quite to the contrary of our thoughts on this topic,
somewhere between 10 and 13% of youth in detention facilities fall into the category of LGBTQ kids. In New York, we have a non-discrimination policy now in the Department of Juvenile Justice in New York City, and thanks to Commissioner Carrion and her committee that she established, we now have a non-discrimination and an entire protocol for the treatment of LGBT kids in our New York State OCFS facilities. These policies are being looked at around the country as the leading edge on this movement to raise issues and visibility about our particular population of kids and how they can be served better in our juvenile justice system, less isolated, less victimized. And so thanks to Commissioner Carrion for being a leader in that area, and of course, people will be coming to New York to see how she does it and how we
Paula,
do it here.
You know, I have a little assignment for you. And I congratulate you on the many, many things you have accomplished, and surely what you've just related to us gladdens my own heart. But what I would be interested in having you do is to roll the clock all the way back and tell us how you got from A to Z. And I don't mean the substantive things as much as procedural, how you met at every single juncture, the inevitable pushback that you confronted. How does, and maybe that could be a plan for us that would be more widely applicable to other issues too. Do you think you could do that?
I do.
Great, thank you, Paula. Yes. Commissioner Schiraldi.
So the price to pay for getting your opinion heard is the possibility of having an assignment. I get
No,
that.
but I think you're, I don't know if you were here earlier when I spoke of
heard
your
everything. I
articles.
did. Thank you for the
Terrific,
shout-out,
terrific.
Judge.
Is the Law Journal one out yet, or is that next
they
week?
said it was going to be out because it was on their website, but I'm not a lawyer, actually. I think there might be some in the room, though, so I don't get the Law Journal, so I don't know. But it was on their website yesterday.
Well,
so
it's an
usually that means it's
excellent
coming out.
article.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I want to also end on a positive note because, I just came here from D.C. 6 months ago, and I've been in a lot of other jurisdictions. New York has an enormous amount going for it. 62% decline in the number of kids going to OCFS from New York City rivals anything going on anywhere around the country. And, this all happened before I got here, JJI and Esperanza and all the terrific work done on pretrial detention. And I think there's just an increasing collaboration between us. We're meeting Monday with both our staff to talk about how to, really completely reduce the use of non-secure care and create a whole continuum for the young people that would otherwise be in OCFS non-secure care, and they're sort of bit by bit move towards local control of young people who would formerly go to the state system. Gladys is not going to be around forever, and most centralized state bureaucracies in juvenile justice around the country stink. I mean, it's not a good model. It's a lousy model. And so more and more, I want to see if we can shift towards local control of that. There's a lot of problems with local control, too, but they tend to be a bit better than centralized stuff. And I think New York really has the opportunity to be the leaders in this field. I think California dramatically reduced the number of kids in the youth authority, but they screwed it up. They really didn't do it well. They just sort of dumped everybody back on the counties. They gave them money, but they just dumped everybody back. And I think New York can really be the kind of place where people will come to and say, wow, this is how you do it if you want to reduce centralized state bureaucracy, put more people in local, technical assistance, training, oversight, all those things. And I think that can be one place where we cut our teeth. But also, I want to just give a little momentary shout out to the law department because the very first thing Angela Albertus came to us and said is, we need to divert more kids, as soon as she was appointed. And so we're looking at youth court as one way of having kids.
Well,
be able
terrific.
to
I
get
hope you will
diverted.
allow me to be part of it.
I would love to
Because
have
I
you be
say
part of it,
pushing
yeah.
people away is a bad thing.
I
We should
understand,
do
Judge.
less of that.
I understand that.
And I think I've got some wonderful partners here in the audience
Yep.
that I'm delivering to you as well.
That's great. Thank you very much, Judge.
So, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been a very stimulating and in some ways Judge, I want you to stay just 1 second more. Unusual event because I think we, not only did everybody get to-dos out of here, they're going to leave with a list of things to do, but I think we're all a lot smarter about this, and we have an optimism that you convey so strongly. So thank you all. As we always do at these, we like to give a product of the scholarship of this law school to our speakers and to Judge Kaye. This is the book by my colleague Annette Gordon-Reed, The Hemmings of Monticello. This is a National Book Award. We're very proud of her, and we're very proud of what you've done, and thank you so
Russ.
much.
And can I? Thank you. My pleasure. I can't resist mentioning on the subject of serendipity that I was born in Monticello, New York. Thank you. Not about Monticello.
Thank you all for coming.